drones, NATO and the information spectacle. The night with Russian drones over Poland became a kind of political earthquake. Several dozen drones, some of which turned out to be decoys without a warhead, were able not only to launch NATO fighters into the air and close the skies over Warsaw, but also to paralyze the information space of Europe for a day. It is important to emphasize, it was not about destruction or victims. It was about nerves, about NATO's ability to act together, and about how Russia plays on this fear. Panic as a weapon, Polish media wrote about an unprecedented violation of airspace. Prime Minister Donald Tusk spoke about the brink of open conflict. The British and German defense ministers rushed to make statements about a new level of hostility. But if you put emotions aside, the facts turned out to be different. Not a single drone carried explosives. Their fall could not lead to a military effect. And here the key goal of such operations was revealed: panic instead of defeat. Russia achieves the effect with minimal bloodshed, without wasting missiles, without destroying the base in Rzeszów, but simply sending a dozen cheap decoys into the sky. As a result, NATO spends millions on interceptions. Politicians talk about a possible Third World War, and Russian television savors the helplessness of the West. 60 Minutes making a farce out of alarm. The Russian talk show 60 Minutes immediately seized on the topic. The airwaves were filled with ridicule. A $2 million missile for foam. This is a model airplane club, not the Russian army. The hosts and experts deliberately turned a serious incident into a caricature, in which NATO is shown as hysterical and Russia as calm and confident. This is a classic technique. Take a real vulnerability, the nervous reaction of allies, increase it tenfold, and present it as evidence of the decay of Europe. As a result, a European viewer who turns on Russian airwaves should think, if they are so afraid of a few toy drones, what will happen tomorrow? European vulnerability. Yes, there is a vulnerability. It is not in the weakness of technology, but in the gap between the speed of attack and the speed of decision-making. Drones cross the border in minutes, while consultations on NATO's Article 4 take hours and days. Russia exploits this discrepancy masterfully. And yet, Europe also has a strong side. Poland did not hide the problem, the Allies activated procedures in time, and the alliance showed that it can respond without going into uncontrolled escalation. For Brussels, this was not a failure, but a test of readiness, playing on the cracks. We must understand, the goal of Russian propaganda is not just ridicule, but to undermine trust within the alliance. Poland looks like an alarmist, Germany, a skeptic, Washington, slow. Differences between the allies are artificially inflated. This is dangerous. After all, it is precisely coherence that is NATO's main resource. If allies look at each other with doubt, each subsequent incident will be perceived not as a common problem, but as someone else's mistake. Moscow is playing on this very thing, on cracks, on fatigue, on disagreements. German tagger Spiegel claims that NATO assumes that the UAVs wanted to strike the alliance's logistics hub in Poland. We are talking about the Rzeszów air base. This is the main base through which the main arms supplies to Kiev are sent. At the same time, the Polish publication TVN, citing the Polish prosecutor's office, reports that according to the inspection data, it became known that none of the drones had a warhead. That is, all the drones were decoys and could not strike. They had nothing with which to strike. CNN claims that the incident with the UAV occurred at the very moment when Trump's special envoy Keith Kellogg was heading to Poland. According to the TV channel's source, he was going to visit Ukraine again. The US president himself had a telephone conversation with his Polish counterpart, President Nawrocki. Trump did not comment on the conversation. Nawrocki said that in a conversation with the American president, Nawrocki, accused Russia of numerous violations of Polish airspace and therefore NATO. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk held further consultations with NATO Secretary-General Rutte, the Prime Ministers of Britain and Italy, and Zelensky. The leader of the Kiev regime said that he was offering Warsaw assistance, training and experience in eliminating Russian drones, in particular the Garen drones. Why you shouldn't underestimate foam plastic. It may seem to a European, since there was no threat, it means you can breathe a sigh of relief. But in military logic, decoys are no joke. Each dummy distracts air defense, uses up ammunition, and opens up radar blind spots. Moreover, decoys create a background for reconnaissance of the reaction. Moscow sees how quickly the batteries react, what communication channels are used, how much time passes from the alarm to the order. In other words, this operation without a combat unit could give the Kremlin more information than a real strike. Europe must learn lessons. The first lesson is restraint is more important than panic. Yes, statements by politicians are necessary, but the main thing is not to allow each episode to be turned into an apocalyptic headline. The second lesson is that institutions are more important than emotions. NATO's Article 4 is not a sign of weakness, but part of a pre-written algorithm. And it is this algorithm that prevents an accident or provocation from leading to escalation.